I never believed in the stories they told about the trail behind the old mill. It was just another piece of local folklore, something to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. But that didn't stop my best friends, Jake and Emily, from dragging me out there one chilly autumn evening. Jake was always the adventurous type. He lived for adrenaline. Whether it was cliff jumping, urban exploring, or sneaking into places no one dared go. Emily, on the other hand, was quieter, more cautious, but she had a fascination with the unknown. Ghosts, haunted places, unsolved mysteries. She was the one who first brought up the trail, claiming she'd heard about strange things happening there. And me? Well, I wasn't much of a believer in the paranormal. To me, it was just an old, overgrown path that led to nowhere. But as we stood at the edge of the woods, staring down that narrow dirt trail, something felt different. The air was heavy, the trees unnaturally still, and despite my skepticism, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Emily had a flashlight, and Jake had his phone out, recording everything for his channel. He always wanted to catch something cool on camera. We started walking, the crunch of leaves beneath our feet the only sound. The further we went, the darker it became, the trees forming a canopy overhead that blocked out the moonlight. "Are we sure this is a good idea?" I asked, half joking but with an edge to my voice. Emily glanced at me with a reassuring smile, but even she seemed on edge. Jake just laughed it off. "Come on, it's just a trail. There's nothing out here but some old trees." But as we ventured deeper, the atmosphere changed. The silence became oppressive, and the air turned cold, unnaturally cold. I glanced over at Emily, who had stopped walking. She was staring off into the woods, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I didn't hear anything, but something in her voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Jake, always the skeptic, pointed his camera towards the trees. "Probably just an animal. Let's keep going." But I knew Emily wasn't easily spooked. If she was scared, something was wrong. We kept walking, but I could feel the tension rising. Each step felt heavier, and the trail seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. It was as if the forest was swallowing us whole. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it, a distant, echoing sound. At first, it was hard to place, like a low hum, almost too faint to notice. But as we stopped and listened, it grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from deeper down the trail. The sound was unsettling, like a chant, distant yet strangely rhythmic. My throat tightened as I exchanged a nervous glance with Emily. Even Jake, usually fearless, had stopped recording, his grip tightening around his phone. "What is that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake forced a chuckle, but there was no humor in it this time. "Probably just wind through the trees or something. Let's keep moving." But none of us moved. That sound, it didn't belong here. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It felt wrong, like it came from somewhere deep, somewhere old. My legs were telling me to turn around, to head back before we found out what was making that noise. But Jake was already stepping forward again, drawn by his own curiosity. "Come on, just a little further," he urged. But there was an edge to his voice now. Emily hesitated, clutching her flashlight tighter. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, just beyond the edge of the light. My heart raced, but I wasn't about to let Jake go off alone. So I followed him, and Emily, though reluctant, fell in step behind us. The sound grew louder as we rounded a bend in the trail, revealing a small clearing up ahead. In the middle of it, half hidden by tangled roots and fallen branches, was something that made my stomach turn. A stone structure, weathered and cracked, barely visible through the overgrowth. It looked like an altar, ancient and forgotten. And that sound, the chant, was coming from somewhere near it. "What the hell is that?" Jake asked, his voice hushed. Emily stepped closer to me, her eyes wide. "I've never heard of this being here. This wasn't in any of the stories." Jake, ever the explorer, approached the altar, reaching out to brush aside the thick moss covering it. "It's probably just some old marker or something, maybe a leftover from when people used to live out here." But as soon as he touched it, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. The wind, the distant rustling of leaves, even the chirping of crickets. Everything went dead still. We stood frozen, waiting, the weight of the silence pressing down on us. Then we heard it, a whisper, soft and barely there, but clear enough to send a chill down my spine. It came from the trees, or maybe from behind us. It was impossible to tell. Leave. My heart pounded in my chest. I glanced at Emily. Her face had gone pale, her hand gripping my arm now. Jake had taken a step back from the altar, his bravado gone. "We need to go," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Yeah, maybe this wasn't such a good idea," Jake muttered, backing away slowly, his eyes darting around the clearing. But before we could turn, something moved. From the shadows beyond the altar, a figure stepped out, tall, cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by the night. It stood still, watching us, silent and unmoving. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tell if it was human or something else, but every instinct in me screamed to run. "Jake," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We need to get out of here. Now." For once, Jake didn't argue. He turned and bolted back down the trail, Emily and I right behind him. The trees seemed to close in around us, the path twisting in ways I didn't remember. The sound of our footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Behind us, the chanting had started again, louder this time and closer. Whatever that thing was, it was following us. We ran faster, hearts pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. The trail seemed endless, and no matter how fast we ran, the presence behind us was always there, lurking just out of sight, growing closer with every step. Finally, we burst out of the woods, the cold night air hitting us like a slap. My car was parked at the edge of the trees, and without a second thought, we piled in. Jake slammed on the gas, and we sped down the road, not daring to look back. As we drove away, the chanting faded into the distance, but the weight of what we had seen, what we had heard, lingered. None of us spoke, the silence in the car thick with the unspoken fear that something had followed us, something we couldn't explain. But as we reached the main road, Jake broke the silence, his voice low and unsteady. "We're never coming back here." None of us disagreed. Yet, as we pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there in the woods wasn't done with us.